Hey, good morning. How are you, Keith?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Um,
Good.
so I know that you've had a lot to say about your experiences and perspective on things that you've gotten over your years in ministry. And so I just want to take a few minutes this morning and ask you a few questions and give you a chance to chime in on this idea of racism and obviously in America it's a big deal right now and has been for quite some time. But I think I've heard you say some things that may bring some added perspective to this, and thank you for your willingness to do some of that.
Well, sure. I appreciate it, and I think it's good we're talking. I think we could probably still collectively do a lot better at being willing to listen. I'm hearing a lot of let's talk, but then as soon as someone says something that's different than what I felt or believed or different than the narrative, then they're shut down. I saw that happen to somebody yesterday on social media. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you talk about racism, we're talking about a big problem in the United States. And I have to specify the United States because racism is not necessarily a big problem in many other places, in other countries. Let me say it that way. I've been in about 60 different countries on 6 different continents, and the reality is most of them are extremely homogenous. I think that if you did you looked at the numbers, the United States, well, the United States is the fourth largest country in the world and by population, and the other 3 are incredibly homogenous. So I feel pretty confident when I say the United States is the largest non-homogenous country in the world. And that's part of the American dream. That's how my grandfather ended up in this country from another continent. It inherently can be problematic in that it brings us in contact on a regular basis with people who are very different from us in a visible way. I may not be different any other way, but visibly, they are. Whereas if you go to India, where I just was in March, 1.3 billion people, and everybody looks the same. Essentially, China, I've been in China this year as well. Also over 1 billion people, but incredibly homogenous. So nobody in that country necessarily, or at least they're least likely to look at somebody and make judgments based on skin tone. And but in this country, we have that. We have the largest non-homogeneous country in the world, and that is inherently problematic when people don't have the right hearts and the right attitudes. And so that's why I specify in the United States. But what I have noticed in other places is that even when the country is homogenous, everybody's of the same race, there are still possible reasons to dislike or prejudge somebody. And I think that's where perhaps we haven't done a really good job defining terms. In the United States, we talk racism, and that is obviously a problem, but it is only a single prejudging criteria, if you will. If you're a racist, you prejudge based on race, or you believe your race is somehow superior, or you could even look down on another race, but then also kind of think another race is probably superior. The white guy says, well, the black guy is, whatever, but the Asian guy, he's really, and so there's a lot of facets to this, and and I'm afraid sometimes we just very simplistically talk racism when, and for some people that is the number one issue, but for a lot of people there are other prejudices that are just as wrong and just as harmful and hurtful in that way as well.
Yeah, so that I think I love what you're bringing out, which is racism may not be as obvious or an issue at all in some other countries, but prejudice still exists. So, what are some things that you've seen in your experiences overseas that have been other ways prejudice rears its ugly head?
Yeah. Well, in the years, been in these different countries and different cultures, for the average American, I think the general perception is the only big reason people don't like each other has to do with race. But really, that's not even all that accurate as well. And then there have even been those who have dismissed any thought that they might possibly have racist tendencies because they have a friend of a different race. The white guy says, "Well, I'm not a racist. I have a black friend." "Oh, tell me about your black friend." "Well, we work together." "Oh, so you have the same occupation, you have basically the same income level." "Yeah." "Oh, well, tell me about him." "Well, he's got a wife and 2 kids." "Oh, you mean like you, right?" "Yeah." "Well, yeah." "Oh, he's a great guy, though. I mean, he loves to play pranks at work and stuff." "Oh, like you do, right?" So we, so the bottom line is we do pretty well with people who are not different than us, even if the skin color is different. Because you hear a lot of people say, "Well, skin color is such a dumb reason to hate," and obviously it is. It really isn't usually the main source, because it's if somebody's different than me, maybe it is the skin color, but maybe it's something else as well. And so, for example, in India, you've got the years of the caste system, and one will look down on the other, the same race. You've got religious differences there. The Hindus look down, and their government is very pro-Hindu at the moment. For the last few years, has been very hard on anybody who's not Hindu. And so so if you are an upper caste Hindu and your daughter is kind of liking this lower caste Christian, it's not going to work. And she's not going to say, "But Dad, we have the same skin color." He's going to say, "I don't care. I can't stand anybody in that caste. I can't stand anybody in that religion. You name it." I was in Nigeria one time. I remember being one of the bigger eye openers for me. This was like 15 years ago, probably. I was driving through this village, and on both sides of the road, things were on fire, and not like blazing, but they were still smoldering and smoking. And I asked what had happened. They said, "Well, there was a squabble between 2 tribes." And I kind of remember thinking, this is kind of cool. This is like a National Geographic. I just came on the tail end of a tribal battle. Fast forward 6-12 months later, going back through the same place, and things are burning on both sides again. And I said, "Hey guys, the last time I was here, it was burning." And they went, "Oh yeah, happens all the time." I went, "Really?" And they go, "Yeah." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, they're of that tribe and they're of that tribe." And literally the highway was what divided the tribes. And they hate each other, and they burn each other's buildings, and they won't allow intermarrying and all that kind of stuff. And if you and I were to take one person from this tribe, or even take the whole tribe and put another tribe, you and I would think they were the same, but they know they're different. They know there's a difference there that they just don't like. And so there is a prejudging. If you're of that tribe, I don't like you, and I don't want anything to do with you. And so there's, even when race is the same, the possibility of prejudging, and it's always based on differences, right? We never prejudge somebody because they're like us. "Oh, he looks like me and acts like me, I better stay away." We're okay with those things. It's the ones that are different from us, and that's what's led me to believe. And I prepared and even preached a sermon fairly recently on loving those who are different. I think that's the biggest challenge. And maybe the difference is race, but maybe it's not. And most often, I think it isn't. That isn't the biggest challenge for us. But there is always a tendency to prejudge.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, this idea of people being the same, because what I think is really interesting, you see this even with people in Congress, where, I vote and I can't stand Congress. We need to get rid of all those bums. Well, what about your congressman? "Oh, my congressman's great," right? "My congressman's great." Or all these folks out there that are the races. Well, but what about that person that that is in your life that sort of fits that bill? "Oh, well, yeah, but they're not," right? Because there's this thing about proximity. There's this thing about sameness. You know, that those people are bad, but not the people that, like you said, are like me. So why don't you run with that a little bit, and where do you think prejudice comes from, and um, why and what do we need to do to minimize it?
Yeah, well, and I think to the tendency to prejudge is completely natural and normal, um, and typically it's based on our experience, and even within race. I mean, I think I can prove this very easily. This tendency exists even within race, and you and I are both kind of like, we're not homogenous in any way. My dad was half Armenian, which is Middle Eastern, and 1/4 Cherokee. So my dad was only 25% Anglo. So just in my immediate genetics, there's 3 continents, but typically I'm judged in this country as being Caucasian, which I guess if somehow we ran the numbers, it might tip in that favor somehow, because my mother's Irish, English side of things. But within race, let's just say Caucasian, based on experience with another kind of Caucasian, based on their look or something like that, they'll say, oh, that guy is, and we do this within race. And because what I've determined is experience determines expectation. My experience has been, when I've interacted with someone who looks like this, talks like this, is from this particular place, my experience has been, this is what you can expect. Now, obviously that's not true. And on a logical, level, we say, well, that's not necessarily true, but on an instinctive, emotional level, it's very easy to prejudge somebody based on these sets of experiences that we've had. And we do it within a nation. We do it in this country, and I live in the southeastern United States, so I know what people think about the average Southerner. Their IQ drops by what, 50% minimum. They don't know how to spell 50%. All these kind of things, and which there's enough of that stereotype to keep it alive. That's the inherent problem with stereotypes, is it takes so little to confirm what you already believed, and so much to change your opinion, because we already had this existing thought. We came into this with this narrative. It's going to take a lot to change it and very little to confirm it. And by the way, Southerners have same stereotypes of people in the North or in the West, whatever. It's
Yeah.
just
So what is it that you think about us in California?
Oh, you know what? It's what every non-Californian thinks about Californians, because the stereotype is based on, even if nobody's ever been to California, well, all they know about California is what they've seen on TV. It's Hollywood, or it's LA, or it's San Francisco, and having, lived in California all your life, and I've been there many, many times now, that's such a false narrative, but it's so easy to believe. And we like to believe the easy story, don't we? I mean, it's so easy to think all Californians are driving the Beamers and they've got the whole thing going on. And Southerners, I was in a West African country, and we were waiting on a plane. I was talking to a woman who was of West African descent, who now lives in the US. And she heard I was from southeastern states. Like we were having a very nice conversation. She suddenly, like, visibly became different. And we began talking, and bottom line is, everything she had ever heard about the South, she didn't believe me when I said it wasn't true. She says, "But you don't have interracial relations." I went, "Yeah, we do." No, I mean, I live there, and I'm telling her this, and she's not believing me, because that's what she had been told. That was what she believed. And we ended up having a good conversation, but I could tell in her eyes she really wasn't buying what I was saying, because the first story you hear is the one you're more likely to believe. But so we do that in this country, but others do it in other countries as well. It may be along logistical lines, but typically most countries aren't as big as the United States, so it's more along other lines. For example, right now, I've been to Cameroon in West Africa. They're having a civil war Now, everybody's of the same race, but they're having a civil war now, and the dividing line basically is language. You have in the one part of Cameroon, they're primarily English speaking. It's a pidgin English, and then the other part of Cameroon is French, and they're having a all out, and it doesn't make the news because it's a small country, but they're having an awful miserable civil war that's based basically on you speak French, so I've got to shoot you. You know it. And I know that sounds, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that really is the dividing line. It isn't race. And so I see it among tribes in Tanzania, and I don't know if any Tanzanians are going to see this, but in Tanzania they have a saying. It's a known saying. All Chagas are thieves. Chaga is a tribe of Tanzanians, and they primarily live around near Mount Kilimanjaro. But there's just a saying, you read in the Bible, all Cretans are what? Lazy, liars, gluttons. Paul was just quoting one of their sayings, but it just proves how easy it is for us to believe. So here's a person that looks like another person, but they've got this saying that if you're of that tribe, you are this way. By the way, somehow Chaga women have the reputation of killing their husbands. They are called the Black Widows. I know Chagas that I would trust with anything, but there is somehow this stereotype got started. So even when it isn't race, there's always something that could potentially divide us. And that's why I feel like we do need to focus on the race thing. I would like for us to broaden our perspective and think even bigger about getting rid of these prejudices, allowing our tendency to prejudge, which is natural and sometimes accurate. But do I allow that? Do I let that cause me to treat you in a bad way, an ungodly way, an unkind way? Those are the things we really got to work on. Because even at the end of the day, in the U.S., we solve racism, which it won't. But I can take you to other countries where everybody's of the same race and you still have some of the same exact issues. I have a friend in Cameroon, and if I were speaking to an American audience, I may phrase it this way and I might leave out some of the details until the end, but I would say perhaps this way. I have a friend who's a young black man, and he was on a street corner, he and several other black men, and they were waiting on a bus, and the police came in and just rounded everybody up of the certain, if you were a male in this age range, they arrested all of them. What we found out later on was because there had been some males of that age range causing problems in that area. So rather than look for who was actually guilty, they just rounded them all up. Now, if I tell that story in the U.S. and I act like this happened in the U.S., what? And then I would say, yeah, they really did. And then not only that, he spent 3 months in jail. He spent 3 months in jail. They never even could bring a charge or evidence or anything against him. What? It's true. I mean, it really is true. But now what if I let you in on all of the police were black, all the other guys were black, all the prisoners were, because he's living in a country where they're all black. And so so what was at fault? His race? No, it was the police officers being lazy and, flexing their muscle and being overly authoritative and not really doing a good job. So the things that we are dealing with in the United States, people deal with in every country. They just sometimes don't look the same. The problems don't look the same. So this guy was judged. He was prejudged, not because of his race, but because of his gender and his age. So there's always something that could possibly cause us to be like that. And that's why we've got to do better. We got to go beyond getting past racism, because I have multiple black friends who are just like me. I mean, really, we are the same in so many priorities, values, socioeconomic. My next door neighbor is black. We get along great. I grow extra peppers to share with them, but we're alike, you see. And there are a lot of white people I don't want anything to do with, because we are so different in every aspect of life. My trouble is not loving my next door neighbor. My trouble is loving that person. even though their melanin level is similar to mine, I struggle with that. And you think about the flagrant homosexual. I mean, you know, there are just a number of ways in which it's so natural to want to I don't know, even mistreat, but to not love. Let me say it that way. It's natural to not love those who are different from us. And so it's a challenge.
You may know some people that like Auburn and can't stand Alabama, right? And they may all be white, right?
Absolutely. But they do intermarry. So, you know, there is that. You know, that's a good point because so I live in Alabama. I'm not from Alabama. I'm not even an Auburn or Alabama fan. I'm a Georgia fan. Yeah. So if anybody were going to hate Auburn and Alabama, and I wore my black so you could be with your red, so it's Georgia. So if anybody were going to hate Alabama or Auburn, it's me, a Georgia fan in Alabama. But I'm telling you, the national media pumps up that rivalry and all that kind of thing to the point it isn't real. It isn't that way. It really is. Now, once a year or 2 or 3 years, there'll likely some drunk fan at the end of the game gets mad at a buddy and shoots at him or something. You know, it's so, you know, it never happens. But if it does happen, you can guarantee the national news is going to pick it up. And if you're reading the paper in San Francisco, you're like, those crazy Alabamians are super crazy about football, you know. But therein lies the narrative that gets spun. I think we also need to be aware in this country of buying into the media's narrative. The media doesn't make any money if there's peace. Right. And what I see, and this is what I see from, well, I say it this way, between the whites and the blacks right now, the Hispanics and Latinos are going, hey, you two keep acting like idiots. We're just going to keep doing our business. You know, we're going to go about our life. But so we love to typically, and I say we as in a human race thing, we love to find that lowest common denominator of the other person, of the other side. And that's what we go with. That's what we post on Facebook, and that's what we, you know, there's a guy on Twitter I used to, or I still do follow, he posts all these funny, inspirational, encouraging, sometimes just, you know, funny cat videos. And while he's white, he now basically only posts when there is a white policeman mistreating or abusing a black person. That's the only kind he shows. But then you can find somebody else who only shows when 10 black guys beat up an old white woman in the street. And both of those are the extreme exception, but they're being posted as the norm. And if we're not aware of that, I mean, it's inflammatory. And if you watch only one side of that, I mean, you're going to just not have you're going to be angry, you're going to be inflamed. That's kind of the purpose of those, but you're also going to be very ill-informed at the prevalence of it. It's not that common, but also at the fact that most people are not that way at all. I'm happy. I came home from Walmart a couple of weeks ago. Our Walmart is kind of like a melting pot. I mean, you know, every race, literally every race, you know, black, white, Hispanic, occasionally, you throw in Indian, a Muslim with you know, you can tell by the headdress and all that. And everybody's getting along fine. I mean, nobody's ugly, nobody's mean. Oh, excuse me, you know, and would you like to, you only have 2 items, why don't you come ahead of me? And I thought, I'm so happy that people get along better in real life than they do on TV, on the news.
Or in social media.
Oh, well, the news needs that. I mean, I get it. They're trying to sell ads and they need you to, because we're drawn to this stuff. We have a lady at church who is black, who's from the Bronx. She grew up in the Bronx. And she told me one day, she said, I love living in Alabama because it's the least prejudice I've ever seen anybody.
Wow.
See, that blows the stereotype.
Yeah.
But she would gladly tell you. She said, I've never been anywhere where blacks and whites get along so well together. Wait a minute, Alabama, that can't be. So we've got this, it's easy to believe a stereotype. It's easy to fall into a narrative that fits our needs or whatever. But, again, we have to watch out for those prejudices, because the reality is, even that person who's different from me, in a way that's wrong. Okay, race is not different. Nationality's not wrong. Nationality's not wrong. Choices, those can be wrong. Even that person deserves, and I must treat them in a Christ-like way. And I think maybe some people even take a little pride in, being ugly or unkind to somebody who is clearly doing or saying or whatever the wrong things. So anyway, I think that's where really has led me to the conclusion that, racism's a problem in some places, but bigger than that, the biggest challenge is loving those who are different from us.
Yeah. So do you have any last tips as to what different individuals can do to minimize that?
Well, yeah, I guess we make a lot of assumptions. I think, and I think prejudices are based on assumptions, right? So while my expectation is based on my experience, I'll assume that it's going to be the same. And so and it's hard to understand it somebody else's perspective. And I'm seeing what I'm seeing on social media from both sides, if you will, and it shouldn't be a side, but that's where we are, is seeming lack of understanding. If I have a good black friend, we talked about some of these kinds of things, and I told him about the time that, I played in a gym. I was the only white in the gym. I don't mean only white on the floor. I mean every fan, coach, ref, cheerleader. I was the only white person in the gym, which didn't bother me at all until 5 seconds after I walked in the gym. I heard things for 2 hours. And I remember kind of being ready to leave. I didn't take it as threatful, but when you're the only person, my friend was surprised to hear that I had experienced that. Now, why did he assume that? Well, in his world, he had only received racial slurs from people who look like me, see? And so it's hard to understand the other person's perspective. And that's why I think we have to be very kind. We have to be very open-minded and understand I don't know everything. I don't know everything that you've been through. And so we need to, one of the things I've concluded about all this is we need to jump to the best conclusion. We jump to conclusions. Okay, now I know we've been told all our life, don't jump to conclusions, but the reality is we do it. Okay, we do it. So what if I trained myself to jump to the best conclusion? Now that may be incorrect. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe that's not the best conclusion, but when that person who's different than me didn't speak to me when I spoke to them, or they accidentally cut me off, or they cut me off in the road, or whatever, the natural thing to do is assume it's because of the difference. And again, we don't do that with people who are similar. If I'm driving down the road and a white guy cuts me off, I'm like, oh, you white drivers, you're the worst. We don't do that. So what if I train myself to jump to the best conclusion? And that's a biblical principle. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13:8, love is eager to believe the best. So not everything that is done to me at the hands of somebody who's different than me is a slight or an injury. And even if it is, what good does it do me to take that to heart and really internalize that? There have been women who have just had a lot of bad luck with men, and they just conclude men are terrible and they're rotten, and a lot of them are, but it's just easy to, based on our experiences, to draw these big, broad, sweeping generalizations and make these wholesale comments and accusations and hold these beliefs. And so we need to to recognize that tendency. I think that's where it begins. We don't recognize how easy it is for that to happen. But I'm telling you, there are people all over the world who look just like the people they can't stand. They look just like the people they would never let their children marry. They don't want their children being friends with them. They look just alike. There is always something that is different. And if we're really going to be spiritually mature people, we're going to have to learn to love those who are different. And I think that would begin with understanding there's just kind of an inherent challenge in doing that.
Yeah, and that we just have to be intentional about overcoming it. Yeah, excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. Well,
we like differences. We say diversity is good until we don't like that diversity.
Right.
Or until your diversity doesn't look like my diversity. I'm seeing a lot of that. We love diversity, but wait a minute, your diversity is different than my diversity, so I don't like your diversity. And so humans are, we're a strange breed, you know?
Yeah, that's why love is such a hard thing to pull off. I was raised in such a way that if you preached on love, you were preaching on the easy topics. But to love those that are different is one of the hardest things for any of us to accomplish. But we must.
I would say, and so I know we're wrapping up here, but if you're talking about trying to do things better, that person who is different than you, whatever that difference might be, you need to spend more time with people who are different in that way. If it's a racial thing and you've just gotten your mind made up about everybody in that particular race, you spend a little time with somebody of that race, and I'll guarantee you, because maybe you've only had bad experiences. Well, it's about time for you to be proactive and have some good experiences with the person who is different from you in whatever way it is. And so we try to live in our little homogenous zones, and there's always going to be something that's different. The South Koreans and the North Koreans, you and I would look at them and we wouldn't know which was which, but I guarantee you they know. The Japanese and the Chinese have a long-standing history of hate, and they hate each other. They're the same race, but it's a different nationality. And so, but you let a Chinese and a Japanese guy just have a burger together, and it changes the dynamic.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. This has been incredible. I hope that people who watch this afterwards will gain a lot, and will look inward at the things that they may be prejudging about others, even if it's not race. Because you're right, we may tackle some of the race issues, but that's only the tip of the iceberg, because we find all sorts of reasons to divide each other and to think ill of each other. And so we need to do, as you highlighted, to learn to jump to the best conclusions and not always the worst ones.
Good.
Hey, you have a great day, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, you too.
All
Take
right.
care. Appreciate you.
See you.
All right, bye.
Hey.